effortlessly on Avatar.
But I believe she can craft the Western Air Temple. Our Patreon project challenge for August and September was fire. So here we are. Believe it or not, that is when I started this. Much like Zuko, the hot air balloon goes through quite a journey throughout the series.
A balloon, but for war.
It begins as an invention, with Sokka helping to build it without knowing that the Fire Nation are blackmailing them into making it. They gain the courage to rebel against the Fire Nation, but even so, that gets turned around when the wreckage of it gets found, and it really becomes a horrible turning point in the war. But later in Zuko's hands, it becomes a symbol of revolution when he escapes from the ideology of his family, and he and Sokka use it to break into the boiling rock to free Sokka's dad and Suki. And let's be honest, it also just has the most iconic scene in the show on it.
My first girlfriend turned into the moon. That's rough, buddy.
So of course we are going to be specifically making Zuko's war balloon that becomes a tool of freedom. So naturally, this build begins with a balloon. Done. Since you're here on my channel, you cannot escape paper mache. To get the shape of the balloon, I am going to be paper macheing over an actual balloon. The war balloon has a very specific shape to it, so in an attempt to get that shape, I'm going to paper mache over half of the balloon with the end twice and then attach them together after. All right, take two. Since this is gonna be its own form without anything underneath, we need to do quite a few layers to make sure that it holds its shape. I put the light through the open half of the balloon, and if I could still see transparent red parts through any areas, I knew I needed to do more layers. I pried the halves off of the balloon very carefully, which creates just the best and least scary noise. Once we had our two geodesic domes,
every time man makes a new experiment, he always learns more.
I really just had to struggle to get it together, to be honest. Since there isn't anything supporting it on the inside, this was definitely a challenge. We were really testing the extent of my paper macheing abilities this time around. Once I had fused it together, I had to start cutting the hole so that I can start building the tiered mouth at the bottom of the balloon.
It's like carving a pumpkin.
Halloween will never be over on this channel. To start building the tiers, I needed to make a few different circle shapes so that I could start building down to those. The first tier is kind of curved inward, while the other two are more just circles that are a little bit smaller. And I gotta be honest, around this part of the project, it started really kicking my butt.
No! No, please!
I know we're early on, but wow. I honestly doubt that it'll be super evident in the video, but I was struggling to trust the process here. I honestly just didn't even know how to proceed. That happened quite a few times in this project.
It's making me tear bend.
Sometimes you just gotta tear bend for a few days and then do your best to keep going. I cut a hole for the top vent as well, painted the inside, even though you're probably not going to see too much of it. Then I started sanding the outside down to make it as smooth as possible. I attached some little pieces of paperboard to the bottom to be kind of a skeleton for the beginning of the tiered part. I attached the bottom two tiers to the center of that, and then started paper macheing over to blend everything together. I painted the outside of the balloon Fire Nation red, and then started to work on the top vent using cardstock because it bends really well into a round circular shape.
I am again
creating camouflage into my cutting mat. I painted it gray on the outside and black on the inside, and then cut some little vent holes all along the top of it. I attached that into the top hole and then started working on the 2 side cap pieces. I'm again using cardstock because it bends really well. I cut a little sliver out of 2 circles so that we had some little Pac-Mans, and then taped the open part together to create a subtle cone shape. To blend where the edges meet as much as possible, I went in with a little joint compound and just tried to fill the gap. I attached those onto the sides, and then I needed to make some outer frames for them from craft foam. I'm going to be using craft foam quite a lot in this project because it bends really well, and since this is a very round project, it's nice to be able to go around the contours of a round shape. The front side cap has this small kind of stick, so I'm using a leftover cut popsicle stick that I've painted black to create that. I'm also using craft foam for the frame details. I painted them first, of course, and then glued them onto the balloon, curving them around the form, and used masking tape to hold them in place while it dried. I'm going around some of the bottom tiers and just adding all of these metal frame details onto the balloon. This was super tricky. I'm not sure I actually lined them up exactly like the actual balloon because mine was slightly different in shape despite my efforts, but I just did my best. I layered on the rings on the bottom tiers and built up the grid frames as similar as I can. The frame has some little connector kind of things where the frame lines meet each other, so I cut those shapes from paperboard and painted them silver and glued them where all the different parts of the frame meet. Then we finally have to paint on the Fire Nation insignia. As always, we're here just freehanding this. So does it match on both sides? No, but so be it. There's sort of this X of support pieces over the front as well, so I'm using yarn for that. Then I finished work on the front spoke piece with a piece of craft foam and 2 pieces of yarn for the curved parts. From one of the pieces that I cut from the main body of the balloon, I'm cutting a circle to make the top rounded lid of the vent. I attached some foil to thicken it and then paper mache'd over it. Sanded and painted until I decided that I hated it.
Oh, why am I so bad at being good?
So I started again. Paper mache is not always the answer. I decided to use a method similar to how I made the front and back caps, beginning with a circle of cardstock, cutting a triangle out of it, and making that into a subtle cone shape. Then I glued that onto a base circle of cardboard and painted all of that silver. And it looked much better. We always get there in the end. To make the top spike detail, I'm starting with a small piece of the popsicle stick, and I'm forming the spike from Sculpey around that, painting it silver, and then finally attaching it onto the lid. I glued a black piece of cardstock onto the inside of the vent. I'm using a hinge to put this on so that it can open and close a little bit, because that is actually an element that I really liked of the original design. You won't even see it. I just thought it would be cool. And then we have to start work on the back fin. I drew this out on paperboard and cut it out, and then started attaching and assembling all of the different pieces that are part of it. So I painted the main body of it red to match the balloon, and then I started attaching on silver support pieces with craft foam. Again, these are all pre-painted, and then I started adding on the rivets with puffy paint. This is always so much fun. Then I painted over all of that in silver as well. I attached that wing onto the back, which we will finish off later when we add the basket. The basket looks a little bit like a boat in my opinion, so I just drew some shapes out on paperboard and started gluing them together. I added a slightly smaller bottom platform tier and also started gluing on some of the shapes in the front that make it pointy. I painted all of that a tannish brown.
As you can see, I'm making a huge difference in the color here.
And then again, started adding the craft foam border details all along the exterior of the basket. This can cover up a lot of the seams if any hot glue has leaked. I added cardstock to clean up the inside and painted all of that to match the outside. Then I painted the first underside silver and the very bottom a dark brown with the Fire Nation insignia again. This was in the original version of the balloon. I'm not actually sure if it's in the later upgraded design because they never really show the bottom, but I added it because I thought it looked cool. I started building up the furnace and detail pieces inside. I say this many times and I never wish to call out the shows, but there are a lot of continuity issues, so I just kind of pick the elements that I like and do it that way. Creating the seat that Sokka sits on first with paperboard. This was truly one of the hardest parts of the process. It was such a weird shape to build in and wrap your head around how you needed to cut the pieces to fit. I built the furnace off of the seat. Before starting the furnace, I needed to size it with the tea light that I'm going to be including inside for flames to make sure it fits.
Wow.
I was wondering how to be able to turn it on and off, and I figured I would make the front of it detachable, essentially, kind of like a little door. I had to cut away the front door and vent area, and I actually could not find my X-Acto knife at this point. I don't know where it went. I know it's somewhere, but thankfully, Neil from Real Terrain Hobbies super kindly sent me his builder's kit with all sorts of amazing supplies for miniature making, including a craft knife. So, very good timing.
Yeah! Woo!
Probably the one and only time in this project something did work out.
Milliput. I've never used Milliput. I'm so excited to try.
I've never gotten this many materials all at once. I don't even know if I have this many materials to begin with. We even have the paper mache, which you know is my weakness.
This is just too exciting for me. Oh my god.
I don't even know what to say. I'm just... Oh. You'll most likely be seeing a lot of these supplies popping up in future videos. There's just so many fun things to try that I've never worked with before. I'm so excited. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to Neil for that. I cut those areas out and then built the vent area off the back. Painted everything silver and then added trim to that front piece and gluing in strip pieces in the vent. Then continuing to build the top of the furnace and just gluing the pieces together in there. The back of the balloon has a propeller, and of course I wanted to be able to make it spin. I can't help myself apparently from pointless tasks. So I started by creating a channel to be able to hold an axle inside. I cut a piece of a soap bottle pump for that. Then I drew out a propeller that I thought was cool. I cut that from cardstock and painted it silver. That gets stuck on the end of a piece that looks like a tack that I made from a scrap of wire and a circle of paperboard. That goes into the channel, and then a piece of craft foam with a hole in the center slides on the back to keep that in place. Then I have to make the bottom furnace circular kind of door thing, building that out of paperboard like everything else, adding rivets on the face of all those details before they get stuck in. I cut a circle in that bottom furnace piece that is the detachable part, and then making the top vent of the furnace from a bubble tea straw. I am a huge fan of bubble tea, so acquiring this was not a problem.
It'll quench you. Nothing's quenchier. It's the quenchiest.
I cut a circle from a top panel to slide the straw into, and then I started working on the furnace door. I was extremely inspired by Studson's Denji build, so I'm using a USB protector cap to make the door handle on this, much like the belt that he used on his figure. I glued that on and painted everything silver. I added cardstock hinges onto the door to attach it, then continued gluing the shapes and building the furnace pieces.
I always come around when I got somebody new. Sacrifice the things I never asked you to.
After the furnace was finally complete, I had to start building the cage around the basket. So I cut thin popsicle stick pieces, painted them silver, and glued them in line with the side panels of the basket. I continued building the back piece that will lead to the propeller. This, of course, ended up being completely not how I thought.
My plans haven't exactly worked, so this time I'm playing it by ear.
So I'm gonna have to do some cutting and rebuilding. I'm using cardstock for some of these shapes on the back so that they can be rounded at the top. That also meant that I had to redo everything with the propeller in the same way that I did previously. I repainted that entire back part silver and then started making some of the little detail pieces. I'm making the 3 little tube parts with a bendy straw.
Isn't that cute? Very cute, sir. Super cute.
Funnily enough, the last time that I did the same thing was on the Sly Cooper van. I suppose there are some similarities between a lot of fictional vehicle designs. I finished off the back piece to redo that entire shape. It's a little less symmetrical now, just the way that the furnace and everything sits in the basket. The outside of the basket kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense, so it's kind of hard to piece everything together, but we got there in the end.
Just gotta figure this mess out here. Close it off somehow.
I added trim and rivets around the furnace and the side of the balloon basket, painted all the added pieces silver to blend them in together, and then added a piece of craft foam around the top of the furnace pipe. Originally, my idea for the curved part of the frame was to use yarn, but like many things in this project, I ended up hating it.
I'm never happy.
That's the theme for this project. I trimmed the popsicle sticks for the frame and used paperboard instead. I needed to add a way for the entire balloon to hang, so I poked holes in a somewhat inconspicuous spot and then threaded a jump ring through there and attached some fishing line. Then we finally need to attach the 2 pieces together, which, let me tell you, was some tricky business. I decided that the best solution was to hang the balloon part and then attach it mid-air. I don't know if it was the best solution, but it did work. So then I finally finished off the part that attaches to the fin. It has a piece that comes down and attaches to the bottom of the furnace. And finally, I had to make some tiny Sokka and Zuko figures. I'm doing that again with my bag of random figures. I picked out a couple that felt like they would work the best for their characters. I didn't exactly have a lot of good options, especially for Sokka, because the sitting ones just all were not great. We're going about this a lot like I made Howl, filing away at different parts and then changing the form with some joint compound. Used some tiny pieces of cardstock to add the lips of his boots. Zuko was a little bit more complicated. I'm actually using the same figure that I used for Howl, bulking up his sleeves and pants to match Zuko's and making his hair. So here are the figures before and after. It might not look like much, but mostly I always hope that they'll come together after painting. So let's do this. Once I had that painted, I had to make the long vest that goes over top. So I actually made that out of tissue paper. I just cut the shape, sized it, tried to make it fit on him, and then started attaching it on. This actually went surprisingly well. I was shocked, if I'm honest. And I had to paint that a dark brown and adding in all the gold trim details on the sides. And finally, I added a gold strip of cardstock for his belt. I went in and added his final eyes, even though I might regret it. And Zuko was complete.
My drink and the paint water, they're looking too dangerously similar right now.
Then we had to do it all over again with Sokka.
Oh, don't let the cave-in get you down. Don't let the falling rocks turn your smile into a frown. When the tunnel's as dark as that's when you need a clown. Hey! Don't let the cave-in get you down, Sokka.
Now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Here is Zuko's war balloon. Much like the Western Air Temple, this one was such a fun challenge to film because it had to hang. I recently got a backdrop stand, which was perfect to help film this with. I hung the balloon from that so that it could be suspended, kind of like it's floating in air. I am gonna do day and night shots as always, so I'm using the actual show and lighting conditions as reference, although I of course always add my own little spin on it. It was all coming from the left. I just have my 2 lights on the left, one a little bit in front and one lighting both the backdrop and the side of the balloon. This time around, I'm using the fog machine. I love pulling it out for a project like this that is kind of in the clouds.
Pretty clouds. Yeah, fluffy.
I am a practical effects enthusiast. I love practical effects so very much. This is obviously a very simple effect, but the point still stands. I don't always do this when I use the fog machine, but I'm using a combination of both practical and composited smoke effects so that I can have a greater degree of control over where the smoke is so that I can most effectively create the composition that I want. Of course, I have to listen to the Avatar soundtrack.
Everybody freestyle!
I always need to mention that my Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and the Pro version of DaVinci Resolve were provided to me by Blackmagic. To activate night mode, all we need are some blue gels. Lighting gels are one of my favorite things. I use them in so many of my projects. I just really love colorful, vibrant, fun lighting. You can do so much with them. If you don't know, lighting gels are essentially just clear film that are colored that will color your light. Pretty self-explanatory, but a very essential part of my filmmaking. I've always liked to play around with the aspect ratio of my final sequences depending on the project, so filming has become so much easier because this camera is built more like a cinema camera. It has built-in aspect ratio guides so I can compose for whatever I'm going to edit my sequences in. In the past, I essentially just had to guess and then hope it looked okay in editing. Probably the thing that I do the most of in editing is masking. Masking is magic. Literally in DaVinci Resolve, actually, there's a super cool magic mask tool in it that makes masking a heck of a lot easier. Masking is essential in compositing. So like I said, you can control what parts of certain elements you want to include in the frame and also where they are in the frame. I also, of course, had to do some very simple wire removal where you can see the balloon hanging from. As always, I'll give you some little befores and afters of some of the shots. I just always have so much fun looking at the difference. I think it's really cool to see how much you can do with color and compositing and some practical effects. I kind of feel like it might not seem like it in the video, but this was probably the most challenging project I've done to this point. I think it turned out decent. There's a lot that I could have done better. Isn't that always how it is? We shall take those reflections into the next project with us. As always, I need to give the biggest thank you to everyone that has supported the channel on Patreon and Ko-fi. I'm able to get things like the backdrop stand to make filming a lot easier for me because of all of you. Just know that I am so grateful. Over on Patreon, there will be a bonus video with a gingerbread house build and some additional wintry crafts. I'm actually really curious if anyone has a favorite fictional vehicle. It could be like a hot air balloon like this, or for example, the Sly Cooper van. I hope everyone has a great holiday season and a great end of the year.